This episode I'm joined by Wouter Kusters, who is a Dutch philosopher and linguist. He is best known for his books in which he describes his own personal experiences with psychosis. He is the author of Pure Madness, A Quest for the Psychotic Experience. In this episode we discuss his latest book, which is yet to be published, called A Philosophy of Madness, alongside discussions on mysticism, transcendental philosophy, and the line between reality and insanity. I'd like to say a big thank you to all my paid subscribers and patrons. This work simply wouldn't be possible without all your generosity. If you would like to support Hermitix podcast or become part of the community, please check the links in the description below. Enjoy. Wouter Kusters, thanks for joining us on Hermitix podcast.
Thank you.
That's okay. So we are going to talk about your book, which is yet to be published. It's being published in December by MIT Press. A Philosophy of Madness, the Experience of Psychotic Thinking.
Yes, indeed.
So, for those who aren't familiar with you or your work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is this book's about? It's obviously it's a very long book.
Yes.
Lots going on, lots of ideas going on. Seems to me maybe one of the first of its kind. So yeah, a little bit about yourself and what it is you're interested in there philosophically.
Yes, shall I? Yes, I shall tell something. First of all, I'm a native Dutch speaker, so my English will not be real English, whatever real may mean, but it will be Dunglish or Dinglish or whatever you may call it. But sorry for that, I cannot help that. Well, how did I come to that book? How did I come to the investigation of madness? Well, it is a long story. I will not make it too long. And you may stop me from etc. I used to be a linguist. I was in the department of linguistics. I did a PhD in linguistics. And even before I went into linguistics, I was interested in the questions of life and death, about the beginning and the end of the world, about the meaning of it all, etc. Philosophical questions. But then I started to study, and I was thinking, what am I going to study? And I thought, well, all those old philosophers, that's not interesting for me as a youngster of 18 years old. And I'm going to do something which is pointing to all these questions, but researches these questions from the entry point of language. And I thought, when I know what language is, what it means, and what is behind language, well, then I find those questions. I wanted to rip the curtain of language to see reality beyond words. So that was my first interest into going into linguistics. And well, then when I was 20 years old, in my student time, I had this period of being psychotic. And in my book, Madness has many meanings. And the first meaning on which I found it, on which I base it, is the description of an acute psychosis. So psychosis is the first layer. It's the medical term used for a certain state, psychological state, which can be described in medical terms. Mm-hmm. So that is madness. Well, then I became psychotic. I went off the university, became hospitalized for a while, and then I came back from the hospital, and then I went on with studying linguistics and behaving just like a normal person, so to say, and just having this experience, just like everybody has something, and you tell among your friends, etc., about what you do in your life, etc. And then at one point of time in 2003, I was again telling my friends about what had happened, and I was telling a long story about all the experiences. And then a friend said, why don't you write a book about it? And then I started to write my first book, because this Philosophy of Madness is my second book on psychosis, and the first book is Pure Madness, mm-hmm. A search for the psychotic experience. And in that book, yes, that's a kind of pre-book of the larger book. It's a kind of essay. That book was published. And then I thought, well, this is the moment to stop my academic career in linguistics, and I'm going to do the real stuff, because I already know a lot about the meaning of life and what's it all about. But now I want to know the real thing. I want to come in touch with reality. Finally.
I was just going to say before we jump.
It's a long introduction, perhaps, but
fine. Yeah, I think we'll dip back into a lot of that stuff. But before we go any further, I try to get the Hermitix question first. So you can place 3 thinkers, living or dead, into a room and listen in on the question.
Yes.
Who do you pick?
Alain Badiou, Georg Cantor, and Plato.
So Cantor.
They are close. They are kind of closely connected. They have all a kind of idealism or rationalism. And well, Badiou bases himself also on Plato. He brings Plato further, while Plato sticks to the number of the one. You can say Badiou brings the examination of Plato further. That's how Badiou presents himself. And Badiou uses the concept or experience of infinity, which was invented or discovered by Georg Cantor. So, well, Georg Cantor is from 19th century, Plato is long ago, and Badiou is still alive. And I thought, well, when these come together and discuss the most fundamental questions about being and about what being is and what non-being is and how, that would be interesting. And I also chose them because, well, one is German, the other is French, and one is Greek, and that would also provoke some interesting confusion, I think. Mm-hmm. From confusion, most interesting stuff springs forward, I think.
And Cantor sort of famously did go mad researching infinity, though I think that's
isn't it
misattributed that it wasn't actually to do with his research in infinity, it was to do with something else, or is that?
Well, that is one of the questions. When someone is going mad, the person himself or herself can tell a story about that madness, and other people can also tell a story about that madness. And in our society today, the dominant story about people who go mad, who become psychotic, is there's something with their brain, and it's a medical or neurobiological story. And all mad experiences, the content of the psychosis is being denied and is medicalized, and you become numbed.
Do you think? What's the alternative?
Because you're talking about Cantor, and you say, well, that was something else, mm-hmm. And perhaps it was also something else, but it had also something to do with his discovery of infinity. He was writing letters to the Pope about that he had discovered something about which the church would be interested. Because, well, he had this concept of absolute infinity, and that must mean something for ideas about God. So it was. You can describe a mad experience in various ways, and well, my alternative is to describe it from the perspective of philosophy. And why is that? Because that corresponds most to the intentions, desires of the individuals in question. That is, psychosis is not something that falls upon you as a kind of disorder from the outside, something which suddenly strikes your brain, and suddenly you say things about which you are not conscious anymore. That's not the case at all. It is something from the inside, from the level of experience. Things are changing there. The whole relation between cognition and perception, and the way these two modalities are based in something mysterious, which what we may call experience, is going through a shift. It's kind of ontological shift, or well, it is a problem of how you frame this further. And now we are already in the content of my book. But yes, when you describe it in that way, you acknowledge the content of the psychosis, and yes, you are discovering the worlds which are hidden inside psychosis, and which partly may be interesting alternative worlds or alternatives perspectives on the same world.
So do you think it's a mistake then just to subsume madness entirely into the medical language and the medical framework? Like there's There's something.
Yes.
So there's sort of three paths there. There's the medical path, the
Mm-hmm.
subjective path, and this idea that it might come from the outside. Now, you said the outside one is sort of incorrect. So in what way does the medical, subsuming it just into the medical, change the subjective notion of madness?
Oh, in so many ways. When you are confronted with medical language, with medical discourse, and when you become psychotic for the first time, you have no idea what is happening, and you are inside this happening itself, and there are strange things going on about which you cannot say that it is inside going on or outside going on. It is that the borders or the boundaries about what counts as an outside event or an inside event, those boundaries are laid out in a different way. So you see things, but those things you see, that we normally say you see something of the outside world, you see things, and that seeing that is going on inside. So, well, those are difficult things to explain. And the first way people explain themselves those experiences are with terms they grab from all kinds of discourse and texts and ideas in their immediate environment, and often words and language from a spiritual or religious sphere is used. So people say, when they go through this ontological shift, people say, I had a revelation. And revelation, well, that's a term from religious discourse. Well, in my book, I try to dispel, to further elaborate what all those terms mean, like also being born again, feeling that the world is completely anew or afresh for the first time in your life. You're seeing things as it really is. Your eyes are cleansed and you see infinity, etc. What does that mean? Without only using those religious terms and locking the experience up again in another framework, in framework of religion. That's of course not my purpose to lock the experience up, but my purpose is to open it. Well, what happens? Well, people that they are 18 years old, they know something about. Some people talk about God, other people talk about revelations. They have nothing to do with that themselves, or they had a religious background or whatever. And then the psychosis, they enter into the states of psychosis, and they use all different language to make sense for themselves of what is happening. And they for example, they feel they are the chosen ones because they see things that other people do not see, and that seeing means not seeing like we normally use that word, but in another way, intuiting or whatsoever. And then they try to make sense of it, and in this process of making sense of it, they may fall into the trap that they mold it into a propositional language about things in the real world, and then it is said of them that they have delusions or that they have hallucinations. But those terms are already terms from the outside to contain something which initially evades those categories, escapes from those categories. Well, to a long answer, but to come back to your question, when they are confronted in this, let's say, psychotic journey with the medical language, only with the medical language, that whole experience becomes only explained as, well, all those things you are thinking, experiencing, and seeing, that is all rubbish. Those are all symptoms of your illness. And that illness, we're going to help you with your illness. Your illness must be repressed. We have this medication, and then that medication kills your that sense of meaning. That's what happens. And then later on, when there's a medication has killed all those meanings, also the ordinary meanings, people become trained into this discourse of medical science. They also see themselves as being prone to psychosis or having a disorder and having had a period in which they were confused. And they forget that the confusion was an expression of a certain desire, which was spelled out, perhaps in a well, not perhaps, but certainly in a socially unaccepted way, in a language that was not completely transparent to their environment, and also not transparent to themselves.
So these,
that's yes.
So these, you'd say revelations and people clinging, grasping at a religion or grasping at, is this ways in which that they can find comfort and familiarity within the illness? So to use a sort of fairly heavy metaphor, what you're trying to do is sort of what Heidegger was doing with being. So he's saying we took a lot of wrong turns. So you can analyze madness in this way, the medical way. You can analyze it in your subjective revelationary way, or you can analyze it as something from the outside coming in. But what you're saying is we actually need to go back before all of these and analyze what madness is in itself before it's transformed by any one of these things.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Huge question.
Yeah. Yes.
What is it before it is transformed?
Well, I was wondering that myself as well when I had written my first book, Pure Madness, and then the book got prizes in the Netherlands, and then I thought, well, this is the kind of moment I can stop with my academic career, financially, economically, and I shift from linguistics, and I'm going to do what I always wanted to do. Now to start really studying philosophy. And I started, linguistics, it has much overlap, and I already know all those Wittgenstein, de Saussure, all pragmatic stuff, and William James, etc. But then I wanted to do classical education into philosophy. And then I started to do that with always in the back of my head, what do all these philosophers, how do they relate to the possibility that people are psychotic or mad? How do they relate when they have some idea of system of the world, etc.? How is the mad world represented or acknowledged in the philosophy? So, and then I wrote all these kind of papers, Kant and Madness, Hegel, etc., etc. And then I was doing this study, and then I wrote my thesis. And my thesis was about the experience of time in psychosis, according to four philosophers. And the experience of time, according to Aristotle, Plotinus, Deleuze, and Husserl. So these four perspectives on time experience. And then I had this framework with four huge, philosophies of time. And then I brought variation in how can you say something about psychotic time. And I had written that huge thesis. And at the end of the thesis, I found myself in the separation cell of the psychiatric hospital again, because some other things had happened, and there was a kind of crisis. And I saw that I had written in the thesis that it was the truth about the experience of time, and about what it is to be psychotic. And I was psychotic myself, and I had in my head also this complete theory about what psychosis is. And then I kind of revised my own book, and then I saw that is my first book, Pure Madness, that it was a good book, it was right, but it was even more true than I realized when I had written it. Then I suddenly realized that the state of psychosis, when you are inside that state of psychosis, you are inside truth and you are in reality. And that was a kind of revelation, and a kind of, you can say many things about it, about being aware, just plain being, just in your terms, realizing that the dark room of modernity is everywhere, has been always. And in the end, from that darkness, all light springs forward. So those kind of realizations I had inside of psychosis, and I knew where I am now, just at that moment of psychosis, this is a moment of truth. And I thought, inside that psychosis, I have to report this. I have to expand my first book into a second book. And then came my idea to write a philosophy of madness. And then my second book, which is much larger because it has this double layer. Yes, in my second book, in this philosophy of madness, the border between who is speaking is also disappearing in the book. In the first chapters of the book, I start with writing from the perspective that the philosopher is speaking, philosophical ideas, philosophical discourse, and that I'm writing about psychosis, about something else, about an object. Mm-hmm. And this object, these are the data from psychosis, partly for myself, for my own memory, but also from all kinds of autobiographies and narratives, first-person accounts. Mm-hmm. And then I have, at the one hand, me, myself writing, and on the other hand, this object data from psychosis. But during the book, one central theme of my book is that consequent philosophizing may bring you towards psychosis. And during the book, the language of the observer, or the language of the philosopher, is approaching the data. And then the phenomenology of psychosis, which is the first part, mainly a phenomenology of time, of space, of reality, etc., in which the data are still far away. This phenomenologist starts to become alive and starts to take part of the psychotic journey. And then in the end of the book, the language of the description has become the language of the data from the first part of the book. So there's a kind of circular, paradoxical, Möbius strip-like theme in the book that there is no escape from psychosis. Yeah, that it is so connected. Yeah, that's the book.
Okay. In what way does time change, phenomenally speaking, for the person within psychosis?
Yeah, that's
because I can see the Deleuze angle is probably the clearest one for me, especially with regards to Deleuze and Guattari and the idea of schizophrenia and pushing of limits and the idea that time is out of joint. Yeah. But so is there a general the four Aristotle, Plotinus, Deleuze, and Husserl? Was there a philosophical temporal connection between them? So there was a sort of a general theory of psychotic time?
No, not of real. Because well, there has been written some things. There are of course psychiatrists and philosophers who indeed deal with the experience of time. But their problem is, well, what they always try to do, especially the psychiatrists, is to first they want to find out what normal time is, what a normal experience of time is. And then they want to describe what the psychotic experience of time is. And then they want to show somehow that the psychotic experience of time is wrong, or does not fit into reality. It is against the reality principle, or in some way. Or it is, you see what I mean when psychiatrists. Well, let me compare it with cognition. When psychiatrists, psychopathologists examine psychotic cognition, they use a framework. What is normal cognition? How do you process information? And then what is psychotic cognition? They do all these kinds of tests, and everything, all ways in which psychotic deviates from this normal pattern is seen as a disorder. And also with cognition, that's a huge problem, because we have these association tests, for example. Do you make the correct associations with words, or do you make the psychotic wrong associations with words? And then they have this standard, which is the normal way. And well, you can think about why would that be the preferred way. So I think psychopathology is often a bit uninformed about the complexities of reality, about which philosophers are more informed. So philosophers are more apt, it's more appropriate to make an investigation of what time experience is. Well, you ask what I found out. Yeah,
well, one way I was going to try to start that conversation is to actually put it in Kantian terms, because that one seems the clearest route, is when you were on about the idea of normal time. Well, for anyone who's studied Kant, the idea of normal time is pure representation, right? So perhaps I could start a theory here that do you think that what happens in psychotic time is in some sense your cognition, your intuition, is altering your relation to representation in the way that, to use Schopenhauer, who was going from Kant, this is a bit of a stretch, but in a psychotic break, are you actually removing the veil of Maya, as Schopenhauer would say? Are you getting beyond representation?
Yes, in a way. In a way, that is an interesting way to frame it. Well, but with Kant, it is still more difficult because he has various ideas about time. For time on the low level of experience, time as the framework, the inescapable framework, the Anschauungsweisen, how do you call it? The manners of intuition. Mm-hmm. You have space and time, and everything we have knowledge about is knowledge in time, and used a kind of absolute time, from on the ground with a certain speed, etc. And that's a handy way to conceptualize physics. It is a way to explain physical time. But there are at least two problems with that. One problem is the standpoint of the ego, this intuition of time, this Anschauungsweise. Well, that's in fact where Husserl is coming into, because when you experience something in time, when do you experience it? It is you experience something in the present, but you do never experience a past event. So that past event was in the present, and then Husserl comes in to talk about that there is only a present in which things are going on, and that those things are leaving a trace, like a comet with a comet tail, and this trace, is being held in your short-term memory. This the Husserlian retention, and then later it's not in your retention, in your immediate experience of time anymore with Husserl, and it becomes part of your recollection. And with Husserl, and this is all the subjective experience of time, about which Kant does not really say many interesting things, but which are kind of presupposed. But when you, because we are talking about the psychotic experience of time, with the psychotic experience of time, you have this experience of time in the present. You have also this immediate effects of events that just happened, which are in your retention, and you have this huge amount of recollection of data about the past, which are from a million years ago until a week ago, and it's a whole recollection in which there are structures, which are narrative structures, which there is a common knowledge about how events are related. No one will say that the First World War happened after the Second World War, because
some philosophers in abstract might.
Yes, and some of those abstract philosophers are psychotics. That is indeed because in this recollection, there's a kind of constructive or narrative compound in it, or part in it, in which you can change the past. You can change the interpretation of the past, but the interpretation of what? Of something that is not here anymore, and which you cannot check, which you cannot reach, and which has a kind of imaginative character. So this past is a kind of it's kind of virtuality, That's also where the leuze comes in somewhere. That this virtuality and this actual reality of habits somewhere touch each other, and on this touch of the virtual cone and the real plane, according to my interpretation of the leuze in my thesis at the time about the leuze on mad time, this touching of the cone and the plane is a moment of fire. So I use this metaphor of fire, a fire that may be creative to mold things and to create things, but can also be destructive. This metaphor of fire is one of the 4 components of a description of what time is. And I use also Husserl for the fluid time, this water. And then I use Plotin, of course, for air. And then I use Aristotle for land. And then you have these famous Greek 4 metaphors or symbols with which you can speak about time. And when we use those metaphors and they are stretched out into philosophies, we have all kinds of different philosophies. Makes a mess, makes a rubbish of all those metaphors, and creates his own work of art of time. And he makes a kind of crystal, and he tries to see through the crystal, and then he sees things. Well, that is to speak a little metaphorical about it. But well, in this talking about the mad experience of time, the many people who are psychotic, when we approach it from this road of what philosophy is about, then I would say that we have 2 main entrances into philosophy. That is starting from Aristotle. We have wonder or amazement without an object, and we have reflection also without an object. With reflection or thought and amazement or wonder. And when these 2 go together, we can build philosophy. We can make concepts. We can fill in what is reflecting about what, who is reflecting about what, and how does this wonder, what for force is this, etc. And my way to conceptualize psychosis is to say, well, because psychotic people, they are in some kind of crisis, that the normal way of experience reality makes no sense anymore. And they start to scratch on reality, and they want to know what is behind reality, and they want to know what is under reality. And they start to wonder more, and in kind of, instead of wonder, instead of amazement, they become perplexed. And they get into a state of perplexity. And the funny thing is that perplexity is also a label used by psychiatrists. It is in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the DSM, is mentioned. People in acute psychosis are characterized by that they have feelings of perplexity. Well, for psychiatrists, that's the end point. They say, oh, perplexity, well, that's very, very bad thing for the person, and we have some medication to stop that perplexity. But for when you want to know what is perplexity and about what, you have to follow this philosophical line of thought, and crossing perplexity with not reflection, but also a term from psychiatry, from the phenomenological psychiatry, hyper-reflection. That thought is not, psychosis is not a diminished level of thinking, but it is a kind of thinking going wild, thinking about thinking. Every thought that is happening is rethought and rethought in other contexts, in higher contexts, in lower contexts, etc. So you have hyper-reflection and perplexity. And those things, those 2 go together. And then you start to wonder about, there are all kinds of things happening around me, in reality, inside me, what is happening. And then you make a kind of, you are feeling time in a different way. your sense of time, it is not that yesterday is closer by than 2,000 years ago. So the borders between life and death are disappearing.
Just to put in a metaphor there, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Michel Serres. In his conversation with Bruno Latour, he says if you drew time, like Cartesian time, linear time, on a napkin and folded it up, different points in time would then meet. Do you think that's what's happening to the psychotic's brain? If you imagine these as all temporal virtualities, they're not physically meeting, but the virtualities are becoming apparent in that present.
Yes, that's a very, very, very appropriate metaphor.
So the big question for me then is, I can't discern whether or not you see this as psychosis as a bad thing, as whether or not you actually see it as the truth, and that medical practice is like sort of
disturbing.
Is it Semmelweis, where they declared Semmelweis the germ theorist mad because it's such a ridiculous idea? It's sort of that, where they're constraining truth because it doesn't fit into a... See, now I feel like this is almost conspiratorial when I think about it, but the idea that the entire medical practice is constraining anything like that into a constrained idea of what normality is, and anything outside of that is deemed mad. I mean, that's that it's sort of like a, shall we say, authoritarian, transcendentally authoritarian oppression on what reality is.
Yes, but when you call it authoritarian and also transcendental, then the suggestion is that there's too much agency, there's too much intention of that, and also that's when you frame it like that. I'm not against the medical treatment of psychosis, but I'm against the restricted, the constrained view of psychosis as only a neurobiological illness. I'm against that because I know there are many psychiatrists. I'm working with many psychiatrists on all these themes. There are many psychiatrists that also hold these views, that the experience of psychosis, things are happening there that may be of important value for the person in question, and you should not repress that. And I'm also not against the repression of certain experiences in itself, because when you come into this state where past and future and present merge, and you come into this napkin, and you wander through this napkin, well, you may find all kinds of matter you do not want to meet in that napkin. I mean, that napkin is probably used in history. So, you meet the forces of evil, to say it in straight language.
In what sense are these forces evil?
You meet the forces of evil in the sense that they may destroy you, and this is not the medical establishment. It is when you are in this experience, you come into another world, into other experiential fields, in which there is a temper of joy and ecstasy, and about euphoria, about that everything is there, and that you are part of everything, and that you are connected to everything just by thinking, seeing, and being. All being is together. And you have this feeling of utter joy. And that is, it's not necessarily something valuable, but it is a pleasant state in a psychosis. There are many people who want to be psychotic, especially when more in a bipolar, in a manic psychosis. That is fun, that is pleasure, that it gives feeling of megalomania, but it gives also feelings of connection and harmony with the complete universe. So I'm now centering on not on evil, but on the good, and on the light. You are feeling there is color in the world. For the first time in your life, you have the sense that you have opened your eyes and you see color as what it is, and you see depth, you see space, not as a collection of objects all in themselves with a certain function in a higher system, but you see objects, and then you get all these impressions that that you have drawn away the veil of perception, the curtain, and you look behind and you see the things in themselves. So that is something that is possible to explain it. But what I'm heading towards is, so you have this joy of being. But when you go further in this psychosis, there's also the being of non-being. And you sense that everything there is, and you have this idea about time, everything there is not. Mm-hmm. Because it is nothing. And then you come into, well, in the third part of my book, I have 4 metaphors, not those of air, water, and sky and fire, but I compare it to 4 kinds of mysticism. Mysticism of the one, mm-hmm. mysticism of infinity, mysticism of being, and mysticism of nothingness. And mysticism of the one, then you can use Plotinus very well. That's very, very handy to use him and to have language from Plotin to describe the feeling of that there is a one and that there are circles around this one which make kind of paranoid circles. There is this mysticism of being in which being is the central category, and which the psychosis of being is just being euphoric about being and being, you want to celebrate. People who become psychotic, they think, well, now I've discovered that the whole world is about love, is about connection, is about harmony. Well, let me go into the street and embrace everybody because I've discovered being. So, and it's not a mad thought. Well, it is a mad thought, but it is also, well, and then they are also psychotic. So, but this is still the happy part, which is there is not a direct reason to suppress this, not from the person himself. He wants to go on the celebration, and also not from the medical doctors, as long as the person does not break conventions of society of embracing people on the street. But then we have also this mysticism of the nothingness. Well, when you're counting from one to being, many to infinity, that's nice. And you are like Canto, whoever, you are thinking and you are counting and you are numbering and you come to infinity and you celebrate infinity. But then there's also the realization of nothingness. That this infinity is at the same time nothingness. Yeah, and there the trouble may start with associating this nothingness with evil, with the annihilating forces, mm-hmm. the forces that want to make you towards nothingness. So, well, that is the landscape of the psychotic world, and in that landscape, you are wandering, and all those kind of archetypes, these Jungian archetypes, also come alive. So you are in this napkin, historical events from long ago, the Battle of Hastings or the Second World War, they all come back, and you meet also those persons who were involved there. So we meet Churchill. And that may be a pleasure, but perhaps not. And you see all these archetypical figures are coming alive. And other persons, they are not autonomous other subjects anymore. Your theory of mind is transformed into a theory of there is no mind anymore, and everything is connected. And what you see is what you think, and you see the stereotypes, and you can also meet the more mythical characters, the devil and his friends, and that's not funny, and that is fearful, and then you come into this mood of anxiety. And you may learn something from anxiety. We all know from Heidegger also, this the negation and anxiety through which you see this nothingness. But through anxiety, while you're still eating, you're eating and thinking and doing all your things, then lived out, disturb yourself and being disturbed.
So in what sense then is any of this objective truth? Are any of these realities that people are seeing objective in any way? Because you said you found some truth, but it seems to me that all these realities that people are seeing so far are subjective in relation to what it is.
Yes.
That, sort of like before an acid trip, people prepare in certain ways. And really there's no revelations from an acid trip because you're simply, you're going to be experiencing what it was you were preparing yourself for in a hyper-experienced way. But with psychosis, is that the same? Like your psychosis is merely going to target what it was you were focused on anyway. So if you're focused on the idea that the devil's after you, that's probably what you're going to find. But if you're focused on the idea that World War II changed the universe, that's probably what you're going to find. But is there actually any objective truth in there with regards to sort of, pulling back phenomena and representation?
Well, that is a question of also normal experience and normal life. When you go out into the streets and you have also your subjective expectations, whether it is on an acid trip or just a trip in the on the countryside, or just a trip through a philosophical textbook. You have also already your own expectations, conscious or unconscious, what to find there. And I think that is not different in psychosis. So this objective truth, well, in what way? Yeah, then we first have to find out what do you mean by objective truth and what do you mean by subjective truth? Mm-hmm. Because the truth in psychosis, they're not subjective in the sense of stemming only from the expectations of or the mind or the inner reality of the psychotic person, but it is all experienced in the outside world. It is everything is coming from the outside, but not as an illness, but as that the outside world presents itself. So yeah, it depends on what you call objective truth.
One of the strange. Yeah, I mean, that's a question of truth and not necessarily of psychosis, the idea of truth, so it's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the ideas that I found actually strangely recurrent there and things you're mentioning, so you've understood these philosophers as the elements, as air, fire, earth and water, and you're also mentioning this concept of the one and this idea of things coming in from the outside. It seems to me that your philosophy of psychosis is actually Hermeticism and a form of finding the divine within all things, and that there's a spark of. So can we say to a certain extent that psychosis is the means to reveal the spark of the cosmos, which is within all things?
Yes.
Do you write about Hermeticism in your book at all?
Yes, but I do not use that name. But it is those ideas are completely in line with. But I always have this double stance because Hermetic philosophy, is that a philosophy of the philosopher? Yes. And then it is interesting, it yields interesting texts for us to read, and we get experiences, and we get views or thoughts or attitudes towards the whole, and what the whole is about, and about the infinity, which is some way acknowledged in this whole, or the spark, or however you mention it. And then it is something that we discuss, we talk about it. It is here in language, even with such a screen between us. Mm-hmm. It is here, the spark. I hope.
Are you religious in any way? Are you a believer in anything?
Yeah, that's. Well, my first psychosis was when I was 20, and before that time, I was an atheist. I was, everybody has been young one time, and then you also are developing as a youngster. You have all these kinds of ideas about how the world is, and in my conception of the world, it was kind of fixed. It was kind of, people, this is history, and this is how the world should be. And it was kind of a left-wing political view, and that informed my philosophy as well, until my first psychosis when I was 20. And that psychosis put my whole view of the world upside down. And then in a way, all relativism, all postmodernism made more sense after that, from my 20th to my 40th. Well, this is also only a story, because it's never that neat. But until I was 40, until my second psychosis, I had all these philosophical ideas. Well, the mainstream of philosophy, everything was interesting, but in which I was not very much interested was theology or religion. I considered that until my second psychosis as something that is not philosophy. Those are questions that are not very interesting anymore, and that is all just something on the borders, on the fringes of philosophy. But going through my second psychosis, suddenly, in my psychosis, well, I thought I had discovered God. One of the elements of my psychotic thought was, nothing is. The only thing what can be is the absolute. It's God. And it was a psychotic thought. It was in my psychosis, but it was informed also by this whole bachelor, by this thesis I wrote about psychotic time. And when you are deconstructing everything, and when everything is falling apart, this falling itself is happening, and you can something can be revealed, and it is possible to give it names, and it is possible. Well, what happened to me is that I suddenly noticed that the kind of structures I was experiencing and which I was making was very similar to religious theological discourse. And after my second psychosis, since then, I understand very well, I think, you never know, what theology is about and what religion is about. Well, does that make me a religious person? Well, what is a religious person?
Mm-hmm. What's interesting for me then is this idea of having all these psychotic breaks. I mean, let's say, a common
not every month. It's
no. I mean, no, not you. People who are having psychotic breaks.
Yeah.
So one of the common psychotic breaks is someone believes that they're the prophet of something, or that they're Jesus.
Yes.
If they're not harming anyone, and they're not doing any harm to the world, or stealing anything, or disrupting the social contract they're within, in what sense is a psychotic break negative in any way if them working through it is going to allow them to develop a further anchoring of their reality?
Yes, that's what I would like to promote, that indeed people in a psychosis, and all these characters appear in their psychosis, and they associate themselves with a messiah, a prophet, etc. That, well, the psychosis itself is a wild time. Many things happen at the same time, but that after that psychosis, my advice would be for people not only to stick to medication and to say everything I thought about Jesus, it was all nonsense, but to re-experience again, thinking about what they were thinking before, and to follow that line further. That's indeed.
So this really is sort of a Deleuze-Guattarian view of psychosis, that the schizophrenic, not the clinical schizophrenic, but the schizophrenic takes a line of flight and pushes all their neuroticism, becoming neurotic, becoming paranoiac machine. So you take, instead of retreating into some Oedipalized form of reality, you should take the line of flight and see where it leads you.
Yes.
But would do that with sort of a buddy or some form of medication as well.
Yes. And I see this line of flight. Well, where's it going? in metaphorical spatial terms, is it when we have the Earth, this line of flight is going upwards towards the sun, and we have this myth from Icarus, who wants to go to the absolute, to the sun, to the light. Well, those kind of myths, those kinds of narratives are also informative about what may happen. But this line of flight can also go underground. You can also be like a mole. Deleuze provides many concepts that may be used in the stories people build for themselves and for others, of course.
Was there any examples of a psychotic teleology where someone took this process and they actually came to some clearer conclusion about reality in the end, and they finally just stopped? Because it seems to me the problem with psychosis is you wouldn't know when to stop. You wouldn't know, you're not going to suddenly say, right, this is it. This is the reality. Yes. This is the one.
Yes, indeed. And that is in my presentations I always use for that. That's the problem of philosophy, about which Wittgenstein is a very, very nice aphorism about the problem of philosophy is not about how to begin, but how do I stop philosophizing? And that's indeed the problem for the psychosis, in this hyper-reflection and this perplexity. There is no end. It is going towards infinity. It is this line of flight. Well, somehow we are material beings as well. And these lines of flight, it is not only a question of matter moving through an empty space, but also energy is necessary. And for your body, it uses energy. And people who are in this wild psychotic states, are manic psychosis, they eat little, they lose weight, they have no time to sleep. There are so many interesting things are going on. There's so much to discover. You cannot sleep, of course not. There's too much to do in the world. So they go on, and their material body draws them back towards the earth.
So
there's no escape.
So in relation to Nietzsche's human or too human, eventually the human drags you back. There's no way to escape that form of being.
Yeah. Now, but we do not know what a human is. Maybe inside the human is also this uberhuman and this subhuman as well. And we do not know where the borders are. So it is not only
So
but that is only valid for the concrete psychosis of people who come into the psychosis, that it's going on. And I know many people who have been psychotic, and many of them, they had to stop somewhere, and often it ends in being medicalized, because otherwise
a positive thing that could be that someone, basically the psychosis actually does finally allow someone to define what they are and what it means to be them, and actually potentially find some meaning.
Yes.
But there is also the negative. There is also the negative that ultimately it's going to be tough to stop within that way of being.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a tightrope, really.
Yeah, indeed. And because also you're not prepared for it. So in my book has 4 parts, and in the second part I call it Via Psychotica Mystica, so the mystical psychotic path. Mm-hmm. And there, in that, I compare all those mystical philosophers or mystics and psychotics. In what way is what mystics say in their texts? How is it comparable to what psychotics say in their texts? And for the mystical path, it can also be dangerous. But mystics, they have some preparation indeed,
okay.
And they have tradition. But it may also be what holds them back by going somewhere where the psychotic is going to. And I don't know. You can say whatever you want, but it is possible that a mystic experience going there, seeing the absolute, meeting the archetypes, rebuilding yourself in relation to the architecture of the world and making new connections, and then going back to your old identity. That is a kind of prototypical mystical path. Maybe it may be the case that mystical is prepared in a way which holds him still back from really reaching a domain that is reality in you, and that he sticks into his tradition. Mm-hmm. So now I also point to your remark that perhaps the psychotic, perhaps that applies to the psychotic as well, that he remains to his tradition and only meets what he is prepared for. Mm-hmm. But that is a question of how do we evaluate the mystic, how do we evaluate the psychotic. But also in mystical traditions there are different kind of ways, and there are interesting traditions which are anti-tradition themselves, so nihilist mystics.
It seems to me that the big difference there is that with mysticism, you're entirely prepared, you're within a system, you've got rituals, you understand you're going to do it, and in mysticism, it seems to me that a psychotic break would be the equivalent of crossing the abyss. You know, this idea where you have a complete ego death. But the difference there is if you understand you're going to do that, then you can at least know that is what's happening. Whereas it's so psychosis is sort of like a forced, non-consensual crossing of the abyss, but you never knew it was going to happen. So of course, so you don't know what you're in. So it can go even worse. So it isn't just a case of understanding mystical experiences as psychotic. There is there is ways of seeing them as two different domains.
It's different, but with similarities. Because also on this mystical path, it is possible that people go there and that they become psychotic.
Do you think the reverse is true as well, that you could be psychotic and become mystical?
Yes. Now, I'm an example, but that also depends on what you call mysticism. It's this whole mysticism has an history of being associated with the church, with religion, and only in the 20th century, and today mysticism is kind of dispelled of all kind of traditions, and it is all it's a study of mysticism. But I refer in my book also on several times to William James, what he says about mysticism. There's much says also something about psychosis, also the ineffability of the state.
Okay, we're getting on for a bit of time here. Is there anything that I've missed out that's key that you'd like to add in, or something that you would like to just mention?
I think we have we've discussed many things that I find it interesting, at least. Yeah.
Okay, seems like a good place to finish up then.
Okay.
Thanks, Wouter.
Okay, thank you.